Okay, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for our next presentation. My name is Matti Saarinen, and I'm the Sales and Marketing Manager here at Broadcast Solutions Finland, and we are based here in sunny Helsinki, or partly cloudy. And well, next we will hear a presentation of a topic called Move to Distributed Production, including Cloud, and it will be presented by Mr. Olivier Suard. Olivier is a Vice President of Marketing at the Norway-based Nevion AS, and he has about 30 years of experience of high-end technology product marketing. And for sure, Nevion is a forerunner when we talk about IP, IT, and virtualization technology for media industry. A little bit of housekeeping before we start it. The presentation is about 15 minutes, and after that we will have about 5 minutes time for Q&A. So you can type your questions on the right-hand side of the swap card. And okay, now we will switch over to Olivier's home office in Lystimäki, Espoo, Finland. Yes, he's an Englishman in Lystimäki. Okay, so Olivier, the platform is yours.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. I've just realized I don't actually know how to swap to the presentation mode. So, yeah, does it actually allow me? Stop pin. Yeah, I'm afraid I don't know how to swap to the presentation mode on Zoom. Can you can see me and not the presentation, right? Okay. I can't hear you, Matti, because you're on mute. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, you can share the slides. There's
yeah, I actually don't know how to share them in Zoom. I'm afraid this is a bit embarrassing, but we don't normally use Zoom. So let me see if I can find. Oh, now sorry. Apologies to all of that. Okay, now hopefully you can see my slides now. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, so briefly, I want to tell you about move to distributed production, including cloud. So I think the main thing to remember here is that the move to IP is more than just a move of technology. It's actually a way of transforming workflows. And one of the key points of transforming workflows is the ability to federate resources, meaning bringing them together. That means sharing studios, control room, equipment, processing, and people across locations. So these are some of the applications that we see in the market. Facilities, move to facilities, sharing within facilities, remote production, sharing between various facilities here, but also increasingly discussions around cloud. And the vision really is having all those resources available for production. So the way I'm going to tell this story is really to give you through three case studies to give you examples of how it worked. The first one is one that we did together with Broadcast Solutions, a customer called Stream Team, whose business, or in this particular case, was to remote produce all ice hockey matches in the National Finnish League. And they decided to do it all remotely and basically moving to state-of-the-art production facilities. The project involved a lot of things, but the idea was to improve the capabilities, sharing resources and being much more efficient, and of course, cost savings. So the next slide will give you a quick idea of what was involved. Here in this case, the project was wide ranging, but the part that we were involved with was the transport of all the camera feeds from the various locations to the central hub. The interesting point about this project is that up to 7 games would take place simultaneously, and all of those are produced centrally in Helsinki. So what was involved here was transport of SDI over IP using JPEG 2000 compression. And as you can see from the pictures here, there are typically two major games on the right-hand side involving 14 camera feeds, some of them HD, some of them 4K, and then the less important, I guess, games involved 9 cameras. And all this was brought into the central hub, used for both production, but also you'll see here video-assisted refereeing. So this is a classic example of moving to remote production using IP, and it's been very successful. The next example is kind of an early version of distributed production. This is TV2 in Norway, who were moving to IP in the facilities. They were basically relocating locations in both their major cities in which they're present, Bergen and Oslo, and these are separated by nearly 500 kilometers. And they wanted to avoid a legacy, rewiring everything with SDI, so they went for IP. And what they really wanted to take the opportunity to do here is actually to use IP to reduce the impact of distance and start sharing resources between those locations, what we would call virtualization. So again, this is the setup. What you can see here, the green bits, at the top and the routers, and here there's a little V here. These are all Nevion equipment. What you can see here are the 2 locations, and you'll notice what might look like a complicated network, but is essentially a spine leaf network with a lot of redundancy. So you can imagine you could cut any of those lines and everything would still run properly. The interesting point here is that the control, the VideoIPath orchestration bit, is the bit that enables basically production to take place in MediaCity of programs that are being recorded in studios in Oslo. And all this is done seamlessly. The next example is one that I cannot name at this stage because of because they won't let us talk about it just yet. Sorry, can't say the word. And it's about to go live. And here the idea, this is a global broadcasters, and they were rethinking completely the way they wanted to do production. And they have essentially 10 locations, 2 main locations in 2 European countries, and then another 8 locations, each of them in different countries in Europe. And their vision was basically building those new main location using IP, but also connecting this up to the other locations, the smaller locations in the other countries seamlessly. The idea being that you could produce anything from anywhere using the resources which are centralized in both the 2 main countries. So effectively what they're aiming to do there is fully distributed production. So what that translates into, and this is a very complicated picture, but I thought given the audience today, you might want to see a bit of meat in this this presentation. So again, they're using the key component here, which is the orchestration, which, if you imagine, we're talking a lot of flows here that are going across all these locations. In fact, we're talking about 100,000 connected points across all this, and all this needs to be managed. So the orchestration is the top layer, and what you'll see here is effectively within each of the location, there's small spine leaf networks, and there are 2 main WAN connections. All this is about redundancy. It's about avoiding that if something goes down, the whole programming fails. We are talking about live production in all these case studies, so there's no second go about this. It has to happen there and then. So if we look at what's happening here, effectively, we've got video here on the left-hand side and audio, both in 2110, so 2110/20 for the video and 2110/30 for the audio. The video goes through our Virtuoso media node, which actually uses compression, in this case JPEG XS, to turn that into 2110-22. And as you can see from the blue and the red line, it's fully redundant. So both the signals are being transported on 2 completely separate networks to the target here on the right-hand side. So this is a good example of how a network can be built, how a solution can be built to connect IP facilities here, IP-based facilities with SDI facilities across locations, and to be able to share all those resources as part of production. And this is not, this is reality. This is happening now. So though I think the majority of the projects we're involved are either about remote production or moving to IP in the facilities, some organizations are already thinking about this distributed approach. And it's very important when you're designing these smaller projects, and smaller projects can be large, of course, but to consider the bigger picture, which is eventually those facilities will want to be federated. This OB truck will be part of a federated approach. So now what's happening in terms of cloud? Now, there's a lot of buzz around cloud, and I thought it would be very important to underline an important factor here, which is often when we talk about cloud, we think actually about the public cloud. We tend to think about, for example, Amazon, AWS, or Azure, or those type of clouds, or even Google. But in fact, cloud exists in many forms. It can be a private cloud, and that private cloud could be on premise. The idea of the cloud is essentially that the services being provided, the functionality being provided is used as a service, as opposed to the broadcaster or the telco owning the processing capability. So here are three different examples. So an example of a cloud which is based on premise. So on the premise of the broadcasters, there's a data center that's being managed by another company, maybe a telco, and that's provided that service. Another possibility is an off-premise private cloud, and there it's the same sort of concept, though of course the telco might be sharing these capabilities with other broadcasters, and therefore being able to provide even better economics to the broadcaster. And then, of course, there's the public cloud. What's important to remember here is that the on-premise versions of these can be normal hardware, can be software on platform hardware, dedicated platforms, or can be software on COTS, commercial off-the-shelf solutions. Whereas, of course, public cloud is really about software on COTS. It's about software, pure software running on CPUs or FPGAs in the cloud. So what happens? How do we integrate all this into this distributed production, of which I've given you real life examples that are happening now? One point that's important to remember is that it's very unlikely that all your live processing will be taking place in the cloud. Some elements might be in the cloud. For example, a good example would be the recorded, the recorded part of your live production might already be resting on the cloud, and you want to bring them down as part of your live production. Maybe the audio processing is in the cloud, but you will still keep some form of processing down on the premise, down on the ground. So what I'm showing here is an imaginary workflow, production workflow, where you see some elements going up to the public cloud, coming down to the premise again, then maybe going to an off-premise private cloud, then back to the premise and up to the public cloud. So we will be getting into this mixed environment in a production environment. And that brings up a number of questions. So the first one is, how do you optimize cloud processing? Now, this is a subject all to its own. But obviously, when it comes to this, there's elements of timing, latency. How do you do these things? Software behaves in a very different manner to hardware, etc. I would like to highlight one particular aspect there, which is, you may have seen that AWS recently announced something they called a Cloud Digital Interface, CDI, which is all about reliably transporting uncompressed live video between processes that are running in the cloud. And this is something that they've published. It's part of their AWS CC2 architecture, but they've also made it open source, and quite a few elements of those are very applicable to generic cloud applications. The second point going on is this: how do you get your video, for example, up into the cloud. So the ground to cloud and cloud to ground communication is also very important. I forgot to mention, by the way, that the CDI is something that Nevion was actively involved in helping define. So we have been plugged into that. Returning to the ground to cloud communication, the VSF is currently looking into this, and there is an activity called the VSF GCCG, so Ground, Cloud, Cloud, Ground activity group, which is headed up by our very own chief technologist, Andy Rayner, and it's looking at exactly that. And in part, it's adapting some elements of the CDI, AWS CDI to do that. And then finally, of course, the big element here will be, how do you coordinate this? How do you orchestrate all this? All the things that are happening in the ground, all the things that are happening in the cloud. So there's still quite a lot of things needing to happen for this picture to become real, but it's ongoing work, and Nevion is actively involved in this. So if you want more information, you can go to our website. There's been presentations from our chief technologists on this very subject and the elements of cloud. I will finish with this, really, just a quick reminder of the elements that are involved in all this, the key success factors in realizing these federated production to allow this distributed production, including cloud. First one is adherence to standards. I think everybody's agreeing to that. We talk about 2110. We didn't talk about NMOS, which is about the management layer. And one element that's not shown here is the work that VSF is going through at the moment. Architecture is really, really important. The biggest issue probably with Cloud Federation is scalability, and getting the architecture and the control right is very important. And then the final element there is funnily enough, is compression. And here there is the emergence of the use of JPEG XS, because it brings together some of the best elements of JPEG 2000 with the ultra low subframe latency, which is very important in this process where you're transferring things. And by the way, JPEG XS is now being used within facilities as well. And finally, I'd like to emphasize that really nothing beats experience and expertise in this matter. It's not easy to create these type of media networks. Okay, so that was it, really. Sorry about the difficult start, but hopefully I think I've more or less stuck to the time, Matti. Correct? Any questions, Matti?
Okay, thank you, Oliver. That was enlightening, and there were no questions. But for everybody, bear in mind, you can always send them afterwards. We are happy to help. So either us here at Orchestration Solutions or Nevion.com. So thank you, everybody. And
okay.
Looking forward.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Next show, so,
yes, thank you.
Don't touch that dial. Bye.